Okay, folks. Good afternoon. Thank you for either coming back or staying. Thank you, Ben. That group over there looks dangerous. I'm just saying. Look, I'm going to keep an eye right on you, right over there. It's got some choir and some just dangerous-looking elements mixed in over there. You probably know, if you're here, that it is a long-standing tradition at Bethel, and actually a number of other congregations as well, to take a little bit of time as we get ready for the formal afternoon structure of services, Ne'ilah, preceded by Mincha, preceded by the Eila Ezkara, and to just spend a little bit of time chatting, talking, and opportunity for anyone who would like to ask questions. So I have one question that was submitted in writing, actually. Kenny, we'll get to this in a sec. Thank you. But we'll open the floor. So anyone, something you'd like to talk about, question, just go ahead, raise your hand. And Jonathan, yeah. Micah, is that you? It is, Micah. I'm sorry, I couldn't see before. Yeah, I mean, Micah's asking for folks, if anyone's watching online, I'll restate the questions. Micah's asking about how Rabbi Loeb would have sort of, coped with, handled, dealt with the last, really, at this point, getting on close to 2 years. And you know what, Micah, I think about that all the time. I think about that all the time. I think about how he would have coped with Donald Trump's presidency. I think he would have found it very frustrating in many ways. But, part of Mark Loeb's brilliance was that although in many ways he was sort of an old school guy in his approach to synagogue life and to certain other things as well, he also had the ability to adapt and to change. He knew that, so I'll give you a good example of this actually, and Canner will remember this very, very well. In fact, we've chuckled about this many times. When the iPhone came out, okay, the first generation iPhone, I'm like one of those Apple guys, so I got one of these iPhones, and I'm playing around with it, and I'm trying to learn how to use this thing, and Rabbi Loeb sees me with it. He said, "I got to get one of those things," which I knew that what that really meant was that I was going to be doing a lot of tech support for the next. And he did indeed get an iPhone, and he loved it. He never really learned to use it fully because he wasn't comfortable with technology in a lot of ways. But he loved it, and he loved being on the cutting edge of something. And I think, he would have found it frustrating the last couple of years, but I think he would have really thrived in that environment, and I think he would have in so many ways, so many creative ways, brought his leadership to the shul and to the community as well. The story I'm remembering, which Canner will remember, is about a week or so after Rabbi Loeb has this iPhone. It's Friday night services, and we're in the Gorn Chapel, and in those days, some of you will remember, the Gorn Chapel was in the round. We had it set in the round. Remember that, before the crowds got too big. And Canner and I were conducting the service, and Rabbi Loeb was sitting in the front row of the round. He was off to our left. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the service, his phone starts ringing, his iPhone, and he had it in his shirt pocket. He was a big user of shirt pockets. He kept his to-do lists in there and pens. And so his iPhone's ringing, and the service is going on. Everyone's looking around, and he has no idea what to do. He doesn't know how to, shut the sound off or anything. So what did he do? He answered it. Remember that, Tom? I mean, he said, "Hello, I can't talk to you right now." It was really funny. And the last thing I'll say is that the exercise. So we have Rabbi Loeb's sermons. The earliest we have is 93 is the earliest I've seen, and we have him up to almost really up to his retirement. And we're missing 1 year. And interestingly, Debbie Wiener's not here right now. I don't know if she's watching. Debbie had asked about this particular year, and Debbie, if I see you later, I will tell you, for whatever reason, we don't have that year, which is 98. We don't have 98, but we have all the other years. And I will tell you, it is a fascinating exercise to go through these sermons and to see what he was thinking about in a given year, what he felt was important to talk about in front of the congregation. And in part, it's a record of what's happening in the world at a given time in a given year, and what's going on in Jewish life and Jewish community. So I've really enjoyed going through them, and I'm slowly but painstakingly picking some of them and transcribing them and putting them up. I just put them up on my blog when I transcribe them and say, this is Rabbi Loeb's sermon from this service, such and such a year. Most of the sermons are in kind of outline form, handwritten notes. So it's not easy. His handwriting is very difficult to read, and you have to be able to kind of follow his thought process. Not like there's a full text there, but it's been really a wonderful exercise for me. Okay, that's it. Yes, please. Stuart, is that you?
Do you mind, Rabbi? I want to give people the mic so that people who are watching can hear the questions.
Rabbi, like so many of us, I'm concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism throughout the world, and I'm wondering if you could comment on the cause of it and what, if anything, we could do as committed Jews to try to address this and stem the tide.
Stuart, that's a great question, an important question today, unfortunately. And actually, interestingly, one of the sermons of Rabbi Loeb's that I looked through was from the late 90s, I believe, maybe 99, or might have been 2000, and he argues in that sermon that we have seen the end of anti-Semitism. It's interesting. Now we know we have not, right? We know we have not, and we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism throughout the country, and you could say around the world to a certain extent as well. I have a couple of thoughts about it. In Baltimore, there is an anti-Semitism task force. It's been meeting. It's comprised of people from the Federation world, people from the synagogue world, from Jewish organizations around the community. They've been doing some good work. Primarily, their work is focusing on raising awareness of the issue. I think that's a big part of the solution, is that you just have to remind people some people don't realize that this or that is anti-Semitic, so what is it? Call it out when it happens. Education's a huge part of that, and that's what that task force is focusing on. I think it's also important to remember that anti-Semitism doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not an isolated phenomenon. Anti-Semitism, I would argue, rises when xenophobia of all stripes rises. I think those things are connected. So, a rising tide raises all boats. The opposite is also true. And we've been in a time where it's not just anti-Semitism, but anti-Muslim sentiment is higher than anti-Asian sentiment is higher. I mean, you can go around, and I just think it's important for us as Jews to know that we shouldn't think that we'll just take care of our problem and leave everyone else to take care of their own problems. No, we have to try to help everyone take care of everyone's problem, and then everyone will get to a better place. But it's a scary time, Stuart. I don't know if I told you this, but I used to, before the last year or so, honestly, whenever I went anywhere, I had a kippah on my head. I just always wore a kippah. If I went to a store, if I went to a restaurant, if I went to a bar, a ball game, airplane, whatever, And now, of course, we're not going out as much as we used to these days, but But about a year or so ago, I stopped wearing a kippah everywhere. I just don't feel comfortable. And that's a little anecdotal thing, but in some ways it's a strong comment on where we're at and how much work we have to do. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Right. That's a great question, and I apologize in advance for making everyone eat dinner so early last night. So our exec was coming down with the microphone, but I'll restate the question, which is, our holidays start at sundown. That's true. The Jewish day starts at night. It's always a little confusing, but that's the case. Sundown is when the Yontif starts. Kol Nidre, however, we always start early. Usually about 45 minutes before the actual sundown time. And so what's the reason for that? And there is an actual reason. The reason is that what you're doing on Kol Nidre is you are creating a Beit Din. A Beit Din is a Jewish court. And so in a normal year, if you think of the symbolism of Kol Nidre, you have, standing at the shulchan, you have the cantor in the middle, and you have two people on either side of the cantor holding Torahs, holding Sifrei Torah, right? So you have the three people there. Well, those three people comprise a Beit Din. Beit Din is, again, the Jewish court. Why do you need a Beit Din at Kol Nidre? Because the Kol Nidre, in a sort of technical sense, is actually, the recitation of the Kol Nidre is affecting a legal transaction, an actual legal transaction. Namely, however you understand it, it's removing vows that you vowed, or it's giving you permission to vow and not follow vow, however you understand that. That's a whole other conversation. But it's a legal body functioning in a real way, doing something that has legal technical implications. Well, a Jewish court can't meet at night. And so you have to do Kol Nidre during the day. That is the reason why you ate dinner so early last night. Yes, you've been waiting, yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Hi, Rabbi. Yom Tov.
Hey.
Hey. I was just wondering if you've given much thought or would even consider in the liturgy in general, including the Imotenu, or if you thought about including the matriarchs in the Amidah and so on.
So we do, most of the time now at Bethel, when we say the Amidah, we include the Imahot. We were doing it in services today, for sure, I know in the Offit, and weekday services, I think by and large, to the point where, well, at this point, gosh, it's probably 10 or 15 years ago, when we reprinted the Bethel weekday Siddur, one of the things we did, actually have it right here, one of the things we did was to put in the names of the matriarchs, put in the Imahot. So two comments about that. One is, and this, my kids would like roll their eyes about this because they would say that it proves how sort of out of touch I am with whatever. This is a whole nother, but so to me, I was like, what did we put the matriarchs' names in or not? What's the difference? Like, no one's going to notice, And but of course we did it, and not long after we did it, I was in the Hebrew school and with a group of kids, and they were going through the service, like they were learning the morning service. Their teacher was teaching them the beginning of the Amidah, and they were doing that paragraph that has the names of the matriarchs in it. And one of the girls in the class said, she raised her hand and she said, "Teacher, I didn't know that we put the names of the women in the prayer as well." Okay. And so that was a real lesson to me, because evidently, yes, we do need to do it, and evidently it makes a big difference, and people notice it, particularly a young woman who maybe will grow up to be a leader in the Jewish community one day. So that's about the matriarchs per se. And then there's another issue, Leah, which I think is the issue of translation, right? And that's something that we've put, Susan and I have talked about this we put it on hold a little bit, but we are in the early stages of getting to a point where we really need a new translation of our Siddur. And we started looking around for gender-neutral translations, and it's hard to find them, actually, and it's complicated. But we are working in that direction, and we'll, bli neder, as they say, before I retire, let's put it that way, there will be a translation that is a gender-neutral translation. So appreciate the question. Thanks. Anyone else? All right. I'm going to go to Kenny's question. Did someone have a question in the back, Ben? Were you walking? No. Okay. So I'll go to Kenny's question. So Kenny, where'd you go? There you go. Kenny has a question about the psalm for Thursday. So you may know that in weekday services, there is a shir shel yom, means a psalm of the day. There's a particular psalm for Sunday, for Monday, for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, etc. Okay. And in the Thursday psalm, there are the following lines, which have bothered Kenny, evidently. For how long, Kenny? For a long time. 93 years or something like that. Okay, and the lines that bother Kenny are, for it is a law for Israel, a ruling of the God of Jacob. He imposed it as a decree upon Joseph when he went forth from the land of Egypt. I heard a language that I knew not. It's a little confusing. It's helpful to parse out the pronouns, and it might help to know that the first he is capitalized and the second he is not. Okay? I know this is almost impossible since you don't have the text in front of you. But essentially what it's saying is, he, God, deposed it, meaning the whole blowing of the horn, sounding the shofar at the new moon. So God imposed that as a decree, a commandment upon Joseph, meaning Israel, the Jewish people. When did God impose that as a commandment? When he, not capitalized, in other words, when Israel went out from Egypt, I, God, heard a language that I did not know, namely Egyptian. Does that make any more sense, Kenny? He's nodding. Is that old nod? It makes absolutely no sense. That's the way I would understand it. Sure, you're welcome. Okay, folks, what else? Anything else? Oh, Jonathan, go ahead. Or wait, let Ben get the mic to Rennie, Jonathan, then we'll come. Or is that Mike, is that you again? Sorry, you and Jonathan are dressed exactly alike.
It's me.
Hi, Rennie.
Hi, Rabbi. We repeat the Amidah this morning. We repeat the Amidah, Musaf, et cetera, during the high holidays. We never do it on Shabbos. Why?
Yeah, probably. So Rennie's question is about the Amidah, and this sort of standard Bethel operating procedure throughout the year is that we do what's called a Heicha Kedusha, which is a kind of combination of some of it out loud and some of it quietly. So traditionally, with the Heicha Kedusha, you do the first couple of paragraphs out loud. That's the Avot and Imahot, with the names of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, and then the Gevurot, which is Tchiat HaMetim, that part. And then the Kedusha, you do that out loud, and then you conclude the Amidah with quiet prayer. So that's an accepted way of doing the Amidah. In more traditional structure, the Amidah is recited fully silently first. So you would say, we're going to do the Amidah. It's on this page. Everyone stands up. And everyone quietly to themselves davens the Amidah. And then the cantor or the Shliach Tzibor will go back and do the entire Amidah, do the repetition as we did it today. We do it today, and we don't do it on Rosh Hashanah either, by the way, right? We do Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, but we don't do Shacharit on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, we do both Shacharit and Musaf. So honestly, it's a time issue. It's just a time issue. To go back to Rabbi Loeb again, he was very concerned about keeping services at a certain length, And one of the ways to shorten the service is to do that Heicha Kedusha, because you do the Amidah in a total of whatever, 5 minutes, whereas if you were going to do it silent and then do a whole repetition, it's going to take you 10 minutes. So that's really where it comes from. When I was in rabbinical school, and at Minyan, we would kind of wait. It was usually up to the shliach, whoever was leading the service, So we would wait, like, okay, what's Joe going to do today? He's going to do the whole thing out loud, or the Heicha Kedusha, or, we would kind of wait, and depend on what kind of mood you were in. If you had time to kill and you weren't worried about it, was nice, like you daven by yourself, and then you do the whole Amidah, and you hear the repetition, and it was nice. But if you had a class to get to, you wanted them to do the Heicha Kedusha, So some things, I guess the more they change, the more they stay the same. Right? Susan, and then we'll go to Micah, yeah.
Can we go to Mike first?
Oh, okay, Susan, I'm sorry. We'll go to Micah because I'm
going to be sweating throughout the day.
And then we'll get it down to you.
The question about the matriarchs is what made me think of this. When we bless the children, when we bless our daughters, we invoke the names of the matriarchs. But for the sons, it's Ephraim and Manasseh. Why not the patriarchs? Why them?
That's a great question, Micah. And it has to do with a kind of weird quirk in the biblical genealogy and Joseph's place in importance in terms of the tribal structure, and that ultimately Ephraim and Manasseh become tribes that have their own land, right? Which is not the case for some of the other tribes. So there are no matriarchs that have land. So the matriarchs, in a sense, it's sort of maybe it's an outdated structure at this point, but the matriarchs, you're kind of asking for that blessing of fertility and all those kinds of things. But in terms of any kind of male-oriented blessing, it's land. You want land. So Ephraim and Manasseh, they got the land. Susan. Yeah, just wait for the mic, Susan.
So with the Psalms, who decided which Psalm is for which day, and when was this decided? And do you know why particular Psalms were picked for those particular days?
Yeah, so Susan's going back to the Shir Shel Yom, Psalm of the Day, and asking who decided, when was it decided, and why was it decided, basically. Psalm of the Day is Talmudic, so the Psalms were, by Talmudic times, assigned to the different days. So the Talmudic sages made those assignments. And the reason each psalm is paired with the day it's paired with is because the Talmudic sages see in that psalm a reflection of what happened on that day in the creation story. Okay, so it's not always real clear, but if you go through, you can pull out here and there so that on the first day of creation, this happened and the psalm in some way reflects that. And that's how it was chosen, and that's why. Yeah. When we get way in the back, then you're going to be...
Well, I'll tell you what, while I do that, we actually have a question from the internet.
The internet? What's that?
If you don't mind. The question from Mandy Weinman is, what does honor thy mother and father mean to you?
Honor thy mother and father. That is, I think, actually a very important question. So you know that's one of the 10 Commandments, right? It's on the tablet on the right-hand side. The lowest commandment, it's the first couple of words, it's kabed et avicha v'et imecha, honor your father and your mother. And it's always been striking to me that it doesn't say love your father and your mother, which it could. I mean, the Torah has the word love. You know that because you say, v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, love the Lord your God. Or you say, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your neighbor as yourself. So it could say, ahavta, or ahev, it would be a command, ahev et avicha, love your mother and your father. It doesn't, it says honor. And my sense of that has always been that, on the one hand, love is an emotion. You can't really command it. So that's a piece of it. But also that sometimes you might be in a relationship with a parent and you don't feel love for them. I mean, that happens. It's sad when it happens, but it happens. But even, and the truth is it happens, with some frequency. And even if you don't have love for your parent, even if you can't feel that sense of warmth that you might want to feel for a parent, you can at least honor them, which means that you behave in a certain way when you interact with them. And I've said that to people who have struggled in their relationships with their parents, and they find it helpful to know that they can follow the tradition, honor their parent by doing the right things, being respectful, whatever. You could make your own list, but that they don't have to feel guilty, or they don't have to feel like they are ignoring God in some way because they don't have that sense of love for their mother or their father that, again, they want to have, but for whatever reason, these things can get very complicated. They don't. So appreciate the question. Bruce Friedman.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bruce is going to ask me, what did the Grateful Dead open with? Cornell, May 8th, 1977. Is that the question?
Yeah, it was here.
Minglewood Blues. Okay.
This is a little bit more difficult for you. That's a layup. The question is, if you would ask me my Hebrew name, I would tell you my name, Ben, my father's name. And then I may add, sometimes for an aliyah we'll say Vih, and I'll give you my mother's name. Could you not hear that?
I got it. So
all right, so that's typically your Hebrew name, right? I'm Baruch Ben Yankel Zelig. But if I were ill, God forbid, and somebody wanted to say a Misha Berach, they would ask, what's my Hebrew name? And it would be Baruch Ben Hinda, my mother's Hebrew name. Why is that?
Yeah, so Bruce raises, it's an interesting question that commonly when your Hebrew name is used, you are referred to as whatever your Hebrew name is, Ben or Bat, son or daughter of your father's Hebrew name, and then maybe your mother's Hebrew name will be tacked on. So commonly today, we would, of course, include the mother's name, but the father's name is sort of the primary designation there. However, when you're saying a Misha Berach, a healing prayer for someone, the traditional way of using the Hebrew name is whatever the Hebrew name is, and then Ben or son or daughter of, and using the mother's name. And so, I've always understood that to be connected to, again, it's a traditional idea, which I understand, but that the mother was the primary caregiver, highly likely for the child when the child was growing up, and that the mother's sensibility in terms of understanding the child's needs and tending to those who are sick and those who are ill, it's more appropriate to use the mother's name in that context than the father's name. Yep. Carly, yeah. Yeah. So, yes and no. Is that too par of it? Because, some of the prayers, in a kind of technical sense, are, at least in terms of traditional Jewish law, considered to be unchangeable. So an example of that is that at this point, we are not supposed to compose any new brachot, any new lines, any new blessings that have the line Baruch Atah Adonai in it. That's done. There's nothing new. Now the Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement has done that, because they feel that they have the leeway in terms of their understanding of Jewish law to do that. But conservative movement at this point would not do it, and certainly the Orthodox movement would not do it. That being said, there is a lot of creativity around liturgy today, liturgy is being composed. Liturgy is being used in all different kinds of ways. An example is like the mikveh, which we have down at the Soul Center. And initially, what the mikveh was used for? It was used for conversion. And then in the traditional Jewish community, if women had their period, they went to the mikveh after they had their period, right? And very traditional Jewish community, you might take new dishes to the mikveh. Well, today the mikveh is being used for all kinds of things. So if someone has recovered from illness, they might go to the mikveh. If someone's finished a very challenging time in their lives, if they've been maybe through a divorce or whatever it might be, the mikveh is an opportunity for them to mark that moment that they want to acknowledge, they want to give significance to, but to also understand that now, they're coming to a new moment in their lives. And there are beautiful liturgies that have been composed about if you're going to the mikveh because you've been through a divorce or because you've been ill. So that's an example of new liturgy that's being composed. So I think you'll see, more of that. The truth is it's easier in the English than it is in the Hebrew. It's also very interesting, by the way. One of the areas where this is developing rapidly is in the LGBTQ community, particularly in the trans community, because there are folks in the trans community, let's say they use a they or them pronoun, and they say, I don't want to be called up to the Torah as Ben or Bat, right? That's not how I understand myself. I'm not a son or a daughter. So and there actually now are some liturgies that are available for folks who come from that community so that they would feel more comfortable in having a coming of age ritual or to be involved in services, etc. Yeah, Patty?
I got you.
Back to that question about of the mother, don't children follow the mother's religion? I mean,
Well,
so it's the mother who.
the determinant factor in traditional Jewish law in terms of Jewish identity is the mother. Correct. Yeah.
That might be some of what.
Yeah, that's a good thought, Patty. Yep, could be connected.
You always know who your mother is.
Well, I'll tell you, I remember, I don't know if my kids are watching right now. My kids are all together in New York, and they're having a Yom Kippur party, they called it. I think a Yom Kippur party. I'm not exactly sure what that entails, but I know that they have been watching services off and on. Again, I don't know if they're watching right now, but to illustrate your point, many years ago when Meirav, who's our youngest, was little, and she was probably like 4 or 5, and she was playing with some other kids out in the cul-de-sac that's just around the corner from our house. And our backyard, you can easily access that cul-de-sac. And so Becky and I were in the backyard, and Meirav's playing, and she tripped and she fell and she cut her knee. She was bleeding. And she got up and she started crying, and she made a beeline towards our backyard. And I was in front of Becky by probably like 5 or maybe even 10 yards. And I felt bad. It's my daughter. She's got blood running. And so I held my arms out, and she was come to me. I would comfort her. I'm her father. She ran right by me. And she ran to Becky. I'll never forget that. So, and that's the Misha Berach, right? I mean, there you go. Okay. Anything else, folks?
We did have one more question from the internet.
Okay.
Question is, and truthfully, it's from the same internet. How do you make sense of laws that were written thousands of years ago in today's modern world?
So how do you make sense of texts that are written? If those folks are out in the vestibule, you can come in. You don't have to wait out there. Oh, that's even the choir can come in. It's okay if you want to wait. So the question is, how do we make sense of texts that are thousands of years old, and when we encounter them in our machzor or our siddur? I think it's a fabulous question, an important one to me personally. I think probably the best example of sort of really pushing that question, really confronting that question, probably is the Unatan Tokef prayer that we meet on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's the who will live and who will die, who by fire and who that whole thing, passing under God's staff like sheep under the shepherd's rod. I think it's obvious that none of that's true. Not at all. I mean, God doesn't have a big book, and God doesn't sit there jotting in that book, and with a ledger like this one's going to live the next year and this one's going to die. I mean, none of that's true. Or at least, I don't know if I should say that. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all, If someone believes that, that's obviously, you're more than your right to do that. But personally, I don't believe it. And yet I find that prayer very powerful. And so a couple things there. One is that we have to be willing and able when we come to our Siddur, to services, to a certain extent, I think, to our understanding of God, you have to be able to think metaphorically. I mean, you just have to. I would say that if you can't think metaphorically when you're dealing with our prayers, which are not thousands of years old, well, they are. I mean, they're not like 3,000 years old, but they are about 2,000 years old, 2,200 years old, something like that. So you have to be able to think metaphorically. And then the question is, what does the metaphor do for you? How's that metaphor working? And the power of the Unitana Tokef is its metaphor, that we imagine, we understand in that moment, saying that prayer, that God pays attention to us. You go under the staff one by one, right? It's not, so that means at that moment that God's attention is on you. That's a powerful idea. Even if it's not true, it's a powerful thing to think about. It's a powerful metaphor. And the other thing is, there is in many of these prayers, despite their age, there is at least a kernel of truth, often more than that. In the Unitana Tokef, part of the power of that prayer comes from the fact that we do know that there are people who are here for Yontif this year who will not be next year. And that's just the truth of life. I mean, that's just the truth of life. And so the prayer is powerful in that sense as well. Oh, yeah, Joel, please.
Wrestling between the role and responsibilities of a diaspora Jew versus someone who lives there. And I'm just curious, from either halachic or Talmudic perspective, is there a presumption that everybody lives in Israel, or a presumption that all Jews live in the same place, or is there other references that inform the role of a diaspora Jew?
Yeah, Joel's asking a fascinating question. There's been a fair amount of academic work done on this. I don't know if you know that, Joel, but so there's a question about, the kind of relationship between the Israel community and the diaspora Jewish community, responsibilities from one community to the other. I think being honest in terms of what the tradition prefers, the tradition would probably prefer that all Jews live in Israel. I don't think that's a... Now, that's what the tradition would prefer. I would argue that's not a good idea at this point in history, at least. I think it's very healthy to have a strong diasporic community, and for that community to have and maintain strong relations with the land of Israel. But I think, again, given its druthers, the tradition would say, you're a Jew, you should live in Israel. And by the way, many Israelis will say that as well. If they're being candid, if you know them well, if they're being honest with you, they'll say, it's nice that you come to visit, but why don't you move here? Like, put your money where your mouth is. And I get that too. I mean, I understand that. But I do, at this time, I think that it's very beneficial to Israel to have a strong Jewish community here in the United States. And we're certainly blessed that as United States Jews, we can go and visit Israel and feel that we can maintain connections with her and be part of the worldwide Jewish community. What will happen as the American Jewish community really in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years is more intensely challenged with assimilation, what will happen in terms of the way it relates to the Israeli Jewish community, I think is kind of an open question at this point. So, we'll see what happens the next 10 to 15 years. Luckily, I'll be retired at that point. Okay, folks, I think we are at the witching hour. Thank you, as always, for your questions. So thoughtful, very much appreciated. We're going to get ourselves organized, and we'll be at the Eila Ezkara service in just a moment or two. So at some point, another question one year during the Q&A session in the afternoon of Yom Kippur is, why do we do the martyrology service in the afternoon? You know that traditionally it is recited in the repetition of Musaf as you come out of Shacharit services. But it's also not uncommon that congregations will cut and paste it and shift it around, and we find it brings meaning to the afternoon, in a sense balances Yizkor, that memory of those with whom we've shared personal journeys. And then this is, in a sense, kind of a communal Yizkor. The Eila Eskor service, the martyrology, you can find it in your Machzorim, begins page 337. 337.
The martyrdom of Rabbi Akiva. The Romans decreed that the people Israel no longer be allowed to study Torah. Rabbi Akiva publicly convened assemblies and continued to teach Torah. He was captured and imprisoned. The hour of execution was the time for the recitation of the morning Shema, so as they scraped his skin with iron combs, he recited the Shema, accepting the yoke of the sovereignty of heaven. His pupils cried out, "Even now?" He said to them, "All my life I was troubled that I could not fulfill the verse to love God with all your soul, that is, even should God take your life. I asked myself, when will the time come that I can fulfill the verse? Now that I have that possibility, shouldn't I fulfill it?" He prolonged the word one, so that his soul left him as he uttered the word one.
They also found Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion sitting and teaching Torah in public, with the Sefer Torah in his lap. They wrapped the Sefer Torah around him, piled branches round about, lit them, and placed wet wool over his heart so that he would not die quickly. His disciples asked, "Master, what do you see?" And he replied, "The parchment is burning, but the letters are flying free."
We'll turn in our prayer books, our Machzorim, to page 339. And on the far left column, English side, page 339, reading responsibly by stanza. God, do not be silent over my spilt blood. Do not be quiet, but avenge me. Seek retribution from those who would destroy me, lest the whole earth be covered with my blood. Women and children together covenanted to die. These sheep were gathered in the slaughterhouse yard. O Holy One, bound and slaughtered, we go up to you, refusing to be tied to another faith.
As year-old whole burnt offerings, were these offerings made while instructing your mother to not be overcome, for we wanted as holocaust offerings by God on high.
Tears poured forth everywhere, the slaughtered and the slaughterers moaning to one another, the blood of fathers mixing with their children, and all declaiming the blessing of the sacrifice, Shema Yisrael.
At such fervent earth, a sight like this seen, how can one believe such awful deeds, leading children to slaughter as if to the marriage canopy? Can the one on high hold back after this?
Anima Amin. on page 343.
And it continued, 10 a day, 10,000 Jews a day. They did not last very long. Soon they took 15,000. Warsaw, the city of Jews, the fenced-in, walled-in city, dwindled, expired, melted like snow before my eyes. The first to perish were the children, abandoned orphans, the world's best, the bleak earth's brightest. These children from the orphanages might have been our comfort. From these sad, mute, bleak faces, our new dawn might have risen. They, the Jewish children, were the first to perish, all of them, almost all without father or mother, eaten by cold, hunger, and vermin, saintly messiahs, sanctified by pain. Oh, why such punishment? Why were they first to pay so high a price to evil in the days of slaughter? This is how it began from the start. O heavens, tell me why. Why must we be so shamed on this great earth? The deaf-mute earth's eyes seem shut. But you, heavens, you saw. You watched from above, and yet did not collapse.
Turning to page 344, Ark will be opened. In a normal year, we would be removing our Shoah Torah, the Holocaust Torah, from the Ark. We'll leave it in the Ark today. I'll ask if you please will rise. On page 344, a Kaddish of loss.
Yitkadal,
Kishinev,
V'yitkadash,
Warsaw,
Shemei Rabbah,
Auschwitz,
V'alma divra kiroteh,
Dachau,
V'amlich malchoteh,
Buchenwald,
V'chayechon, Uvyomechon,
Babi Yar,
ובחיי לכל בית ישראל.
Baghdad,
בגלה ובזמן קריב. ויאמרו אמן.
Hebron,
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולם בעלמיה. יתברך וישתבח
Kfar Tzion,
ויתפאר ויתרומם
Mainz,
ויתנשא ויתהדור
Teresa,
ויתעלה ויתעלה
Treblinka,
שמי קודשה בריקו
Bergen-Belsen,
לילה ולילה
Vilna,
מן כל ברכתה ושירתה
Usha,
ושבחתה ונחמתה
Matsada,
דמירן בעלמה
Yerushalayim,
אמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה משמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו בביאר עושה שלום במרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו
Amen.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
As the ark is closed, you may be seated. Continuing on page 345. 345 as we conclude the Eila Eskara.
From the depths I call to you, God. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my affliction.
Turn your ear to me. On the day I call to you, answer me.
My days end like smoke. My bones are black as if charred in a conflagration. Do not let the foot of the arrogant tread on me, nor the hand of the wicked push me away. Do not abandon me, Adonai. Do not distance yourself from me. Respond to your supplications as you promised. Wherever you are, when you seek Adonai your God with all your heart and all your might, you will surely find me. Bring us to your holy mountain. Make us joyful in your house of prayer. As your prophet Isaiah wrote, I shall bring you to my holy mountain and make you joyous in my house of prayer. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Amen.
Go get him, Tiger.
We are ready to start the Mincha service for Yom Kippur afternoon. We talked a little bit this morning about strangeness of the Yom Kippur liturgy. So we noted, those of you who are still here when we concluded services and took our intermission, our break, that there was no Aleinu this morning. There was no mourner's Kaddish. And that's because we said it's one long day of prayer, one long day of liturgy. In a sense, we're praying all day. So there's no real break in the services, just sort of a pause here and there. And you see this again at the beginning here of Mincha. Normally, Mincha services, you'd have an Ashrei at the beginning of Mincha, and then you'd have an Uva L'Tzion at the beginning. None of that is here. They will appear in the Ne'ilah service. It's a way of sort of mixing and matching the liturgy. Also, the idea that Ne'ilah, to make sure that Ne'ilah is recited when it's still daylight out. So in almost a kind of abrupt fashion, the Mincha service for Yom Kippur begins always with rain. We arrange that specially. And with the Torah service. The Torah service you can find page 361. The ark will be open. Will you please rise?
Vayehi binso Aharon vayomer Moshe.
Where's Ben?
Uma Adonai ve'afutzu oivecha ve'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, urvar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'kdushato. Gadelu l'Adonai iti u'neromema shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai hagedol v'hakvura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'haod ki cho b'shamayim u'varetz ki cho b'shamayim u'varetz lecha Adonai hamamlacha v'hamid na'aseh lechol rosh. Romemu,
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 Adonai Eloheinu, v'hishtachavu, v'hishtachavu, lehadom raglav kadoshu. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, v'hishtachavu, v'hishtachavu leharkadsho ki kadosh, ki kadosh, ki kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu.
And just before you are seated, we will, as we have been throughout the Yontif season, we'll say the blessings on the Torah together. You can find them on page 362. Just about the middle of that page, and then we'll read the Torah reading for Yom Kippur afternoon straight through, and then we'll say the blessings after together as a congregation. Page 362. Join me.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamavorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
May be seated, and you can follow the reading on page 365 in your Machzorim.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el kol ha'tah b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, ish imo ve'aviv tira'u, v'yed shabbatotai tishmoru, ani Adonai Elohechem. Al tifnu el ha'elilim, Elohei masecha lo ta'asu lachem, ani Adonai Elohechem. Vayechi tizbechu, zevach shalamim la'Adonai, le'tzonchem tizbechuhu. Beyom zivchachem, yeachel umimachorat, v'anotar ad yom hashlishi, ba'es yisaref. Ve'im he'achel yeachel bayom hashlishi, pigohu lo yeratzeh, v'yachlav avono isa, et kodesh Adonai chilel, v'nichreta hanefesh hahu me'amecha, uvkutzrechem et ketziratechem, lo techaleh, v'yetzadcha liksor, v'leket ketzirecha lo telaket, וחמך לא תעלל, ופרחמך לא תלקט, לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. לא תגנובו, ולא תכחשו, ולא תשקרו איש בעמיתו, ולא תשבו בשמי לשקר, וחיללת את שם אלוהיך, אני אדוני. לא תעסוק את רעך ולא תגזול, לא תלין פעולת שכיר, איתך עד בוקר לא תקלל, חרש ולפני עיוור לא תיתן מכשב, מהרית מאלוהיך אני אדוני. לא תעשו עוול במשפט, לא תישא פני דל ולא תדר פני גדול, בצדק הנפש עמך. לא תלך רכיל בעמך, לא תעמוד על דם רעך אני אדוני. לא תשנא את אחיך בלבבך, הוכח תוכיח את עמיתך, ולא תישא עליו חטא. לא תיקום ולא תיטור את בני עמך, ואהבת לרעך כמוך, אני אדוני.
And we'll rise together to recite the blessings after the Torah reading. Again, back on page 362, bottom of the page, the last blessing there.
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chaye olam nata betochenu, baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
And will you please remain standing for the lifting of the Sefer Torah?
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל, על פי אדוני ביד משה.
Just a moment, you may be seated. Famous text read for the Maftir Jonah, prophet Jonah. Book traditionally read Yom Kippur afternoon. Richard Intner, an old veteran, reading Maftir Yonah for us. And a wonderful text in the sense of many reasons, really, but also wondering why the sages chose this particular text to be read at this particular time. Why Yom Kippur afternoon? towards the end of a long day of prayer, a day of fasting, day of serious introspection, self-reflection, do we choose a text about a prophet who seems not to be that faithful, and a prophet who flees from God when God asked the prophet to fulfill God's mission, a prophet who seems unhappy when the prophecy that he preaches to the Ninevites actually is true, and the Ninevites listen to what he says and they repent, and he seems unhappy about it. It's a strange text to read on Yom Kippur afternoon. You may be seated. A couple of reasons why. For one, it's a text that's concerned with the world around us. The Ninevites are not Jewish. Jonah is a Jewish prophet and sent by God into the non-Jewish world to bring God's word to the non-Jewish world. And here we are, our most self-contained day, our most self-reflective day, the day, Yom Kippur, when we are least concerned with the rest of the world. And so maybe it's good to have a text towards the end of this day that reminds us when Yom Kippur ends, in a couple of hours, we sound that Tekiah Gedolah, and we walk back. That big world is still out there, and we need to navigate it and negotiate our way through it in a godly way. You can follow the text again, page 367, and read by Richard Intner.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bochar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratzav v'divreihem hane'emorim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'b'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vayehi davar Adonai el Yonah ben Amitai lemor kum lech el Ninveh ha'ir hagdolah ukra aleha ki ata ra'atam lefonai vayakam Yonah levroach tarshisha milifnei Adonai Vayered Yafa Vayemtza Waniyah Ba'ar Tarshish Vayetain Sechara Vayered Ba Lavo Imohem Tarshisha Milifnei Adonai Varonai Hetil Ruach Gedolah El Hayam Vayehi Sa'ar Gadol Bayam V'ha'aniyah chishva lehishaver Vayeru hamalachim Vayezaku ishel Elohav Vayatilu et hakelim Asher ba'aniyah el hayam L'hakel me'aleihem V'yonah Yorad el yakatei hasfina Vayishkav vayirodam, vayikra velav, rav hachovel, vayomer lo, malachon yirdam, kum, kra el Elohecha, ulai, yitashet Elohim, lono velono ved, vayamru, ishal reyehu, L'chu v'napi l'gorolot v'nei da'a b'shel mi hara'ah hazot lanu v'yapilu gorolot v'yipol hagoral al Yonah v'yomru elav hagidana lanu ba'asher l'mi hara'ah hazot lanu Ma'malachtecha u'me'ayin tavo ma'artzecha ve'mize'am ata Ve'yachteru ha'anoshim l'hashiv el hayabasha v'lo yachalu ki hayam holech v'soer aleihem Ve'yikra'u el Adonai ve'yomru Ana Adonai el novda v'nefesh ha'ish hazeh yatiten oleinu dam naki ki ata Adonai kasher chafatzta asita Vayesu et Yonah vaytiluhu el hayam vayamod hayam misapo. Vayru honoshim yira gedola et Adonai. Vayispechu zevach l'Adonai. Vayidru nedorim. Vayaman Adonai dag gadol livloa et Yonah. Vayehi Yonah bimei hadag shlosha yamim ushlosha leilot. Vayitpaleo Yonah el Adonai Elohav mimei hadaga. Vayomer karati mitzorali el Adonai vaya'aneni mi beten Shaol shivati shamato koli vatashlicheni mitzula bilvav yamim v'nahar yisovaveni komesh berecha v'galecha olai avoru va'ani amarti negrashti mineged einecha ach osif lahabit el heichal kodshecha afafuni mayim ad nefesh tahom yisovaveni suf chavush l'roshi l'kitzvei horim yoradati ha'aretz b'richecha va'adi le'olam v'tal mishachat chayai Adonai Elohai v'hitatei f'olai nafshi et Adonai zocharti v'tovo elecha tefilati el heichal kodshecha v'yehi devar Adonai el Yonah shenit lemor kum lech el ninveh ha'ir hagadolah ukra elecha et hakriya asher anochi dover elecha vayakam Yonah vayelech el ninveh kidvar Adonai v'ninveh hayata ir gedolah le'Elohim mahalach shloshet yamim vayochel Yonah lavo va'ir mahalach yom echad vayikra vayomar od arba'im yom v'ninveh nepachet vayera el Yonah ra'a gedolah vayichar lo vayitpalel el Adonai vayomar Ana Adonai halozet devari Adhayoti al admati al ken kidamti livroach tarshisha ki yodati ki ata el chanun v'rachum erech apayim v'rav chesed v'nicham al hara'ah v'ata Adonai kach et nafshi mimeni ki tov moti mechayai vayomer Adonai hahetev haralach vayetze Yonah min ha'ir vayeshev mikedem la'ir vayash lo sham sukkah vayeshev tachteha batzel ad asher yireh ma'yeh ba'ir va'ani lo achus al ninveh ha'ir hagadolah asher yesh barbe mishtem esrei ribo adam asher lo yata ben yamino lismolo uvhema rabbah Mi'akamocha noseh avon v'yover al pesha lisherit nachaloto lo hechazik lo arapo ki chafetz chesed hu yoshuv yirachamenu yichbo shavonotenu v'tashlich b'mtzulo v'tashlich b'msulot yam kol chatov tam, titen emet liYakov, chesed liAvraham, asher nishbat lavotenu mimei kedem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol ha'olamim, tzadik b'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'neman, ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'mdaber u'mkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek. Ne'eman, atahu Adonai Eloheinu, v'ne'emanim devarecha, v'davar echad midvarecha, achar lo yashuv reikam, ki ha'melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah, Baruch atah Adonai, Oel haneman b'chol devarav.
Amen.
Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu, v'laluvat nefesh toshia, b'mheira b'yameinu, Baruch atah Adonai. Mesameach Tzion b'vanecha.
Amen.
Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu, b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha, u'malchut beit David meshichecha, B'mheira yavo vayagel libeinu, al kisolo yeshev zar, v'lo yinchalu or achirim et kavodo, ki v'shem kodshaka nishbatolo, shalech ben ero le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai. Magen David.
Amen.
Richard beautifully chanted as you always do it. The next time we're in a drought and we need rain, I'm going to have you do a Havdallah. Let's please rise together on page 372 as we return the Torah to the ark. 372.
Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav Shemo levado, Hodo al eretz v'shamayim, v'ayarem keren le'amo, tehila lechol chasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Page 373.
Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati atazovu, eitz chaim hi, lama chazikim ba, v'tomcheha meushar, deracheha darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva. Kadesh, Kadesh Yameinu, Kadesh Yameinu kekedem. Amen.
Continuing with the Chatzi Kaddish, page 373.
Yikadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabba, v'yamad yivrach hirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayedecho Beit Yisrael, Bagala uvizman kariv ve'yimru. Amen. Yehesh merabba mevarach le'alam u'l'al me'al maya yitbarach. Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpar Vitromam ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ויאמרו Amen.
Turning to page 374, beginning of the Mincha Amidah for Yom Kippur, just a word about standing and sitting. If in the strictest traditional sense, you could stand almost for the rest of our time together. So I don't want you to feel a need to do that, and just to encourage folks at this time in the day, if you've been fasting all day, whatever it might be, please do not hesitate to sit down if you feel you want to sit down. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So we'll begin on page 374, Mincha Amidah for Yom Kippur.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, ve'Konei Hakol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מסור חכמים ונבונים ומלמד דעת מבינים הבטחה פי בתפילה ובתחנונים לחלות ולחנן פני מלך מלא רחמים מוחל וסולח לעוונים. זכרנו לחיים מלך חפץ בחיים וכתבנו בספר החיים. זכרנו לחיים מלך חפץ בחיים וכתבנו בספר החיים. למענך אלוהים חיים מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיה מתים אתה רב להושיע. מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישוע. מי כמוך אף הרחמים זוכר יצוריו לחיים ברחמים. ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hametim.
Amen. Page 376, Kedusha.
Naritzecha v'nakadishecha kesotziach safei kodesh hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh kakatuv ayad neviecha v'karazel v'yamar kadosh 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 Adonai tzvaot Melech haaretz kevodo male olam mesharetav shoalim zelazeh aye mekom kevodo leumatam baruch yomeru baruch kevod Adonai mimkomo ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים ויחונם המייחדים שמו ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד פעמיים באהבה שמע אומרים שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד Echad hu Eloheinu hu Avinu hu Malkeinu hu Moshienu vehu yashmienu berachamav shenit lenei kochai והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית לעיני כוחי להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד ובדברי קדשך כתוב לאמור ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור הללויה לדור ודור נגיגה לך ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה.
Continuing on page 378.
אתה וחתנו מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו, ורוממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, ושמך הגדול והקדוש עלינו קראת. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה את יום הכיפורים הזה למחילה ולסליחה ולכפרה ולמחול בו את כל עוונותינו מקרא קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים.
We'll turn to page 380 for Shema Kolenu. The ark will be open.
Shema kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel b'rachamim uv'ratzon, et tefilatenu. Hashivenu Adonai elecha, v'nashuva, Kaddish yamenu kekedem. Al tashlichenu milefanecha, Veruach kadshecha al tikach mimenu. Al tashlichenu le'et zikna, kichlot kochenu al tazvenu.
And on page 380, English side, reading responsively. Hear our voice, Adonai, our God, be kind, have compassion for us, willingly and lovingly accept our prayer. Do not cast us away from you. Take not your holy presence from us. Do not abandon us, Adonai, our God. Do not distance yourself from us. Hear our words, Adonai. Consider our innermost thoughts. It is for you we wait. Surely you will respond, Adonai, our God. The ark will be closed, continuing on page 381 with Ki Anu Amecha.
Eloheinu v'Elohavotenu, selach lanu mechalanu, kapelanu, ki anu amecha v'ata Eloheinu, anu vanecha v'ata avinu, anu avadecha v'ata Adonenu, anu kehalecha v'ata chelkeinu, anu nachlatecha v'ata goralenu, anu tzonecha v'ata roeinu, anu charmecha v'ata notrenu, anu feulotecha v'ata yosreinu, anu rayatecha v'ata dodenu, anu segulatecha v'ata kiroveinu, anu amecha v'ata malkeinu, anu mamirecha v'ata mamirenu. Anu azefanim v'ata rachum v'chanun, anu kashe oref v'ata erech apayim, anu mele avon v'ata male rachamim, anu yamenu ketzel over, v'atahu shmotecha lo yitamu. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, tavo lefanecha, תפילתנו ואל תתעלה מתחינתנו, שאין אנחנו הזפנים וקשי עורף לומר לפניך. אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אבל אנחנו חטאנו.
Top of page 382 with the Ashamnu.
Ay, 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 Ashamnu,
Ashamnu,
Bagadnu,
Bagadnu,
Gazalnu,
Gazalnu,
Dibarnu Dofi,
Dibarnu Dofi,
Evinu,
Avinu,
Vehirshanu,
Vehirshanu,
Zadnu,
Zadnu,
Chamasnu,
Hamasnu,
Tafalnu Sheker,
Afalnu Sheker,
Ay, 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 Ya'atznu-ra,
Ya'atznu-ra,
Kizavnu,
Kizavnu,
Latznu,
Latznu,
Maradnu,
Maradnu,
Niatznu,
Niatznu,
Sararnu,
Sararnu,
Avinu,
Avinu,
Pashanu,
Pashanu,
Saranu,
Saranu,
Ishinu Oref,
Shinu Oreh,
Ay, 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 ay,
ay, ay,
ay, ay, ay, Rashanu,
Rashanu,
Shichatnu,
Shichatnu,
Tiavnu,
Tiavnu,
Tainu,
Tainu,
Titanu.
Titanu. Bottom of page 383.
Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu, shetislach lanu al kol chatotenu, v'timcha lanu al kol avonotenu, utechaper lanu kol peshaenu.
And on page 384, the list of al-chates.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'ones uveratzon, ve'al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'imutz halev, al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'vli da'at, ve'al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'vitoi sifatayim, al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'giloi arayot, ve'al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'galoi uvasater, Al chet shekatan lefanecha bedeat uvemirma, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha bedibor peh, al chet shekatan lefanecha behonat reah, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha beharhor halev, al chet shekatan lefanecha bevidat zenut, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha bevidoi peh, al chet shekatan lefanecha bezilzu horim umorim, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha bezadon uvishgaga, al chet shekatan lefanecha bechozek yad, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha bechilul Hashem, al chet shekatan lefanecha betumat shifatayim, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha betifshut peh, al chet shekatan lefanecha beyetzer hara, ve'al chet shekatan lefanecha beyodim uvelo yodim, Ve'al kulam elo aselichot selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu.
We have sinned against you through denial and deceit. We have sinned against you by clever cynicism.
And we have sinned against you by speaking badly of others.
We have sinned against you by the way we do business.
And we have sinned against you in our eating and drinking.
We have sinned against you by greed and oppressive interest. We have sinned against you in everyday conversation. We have sinned against you through condescension. For all these sins, forgiving God, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement.
Ve'al kulam ela selichot selach lanu mechalanu selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu.
We have sinned against you by throwing off all restraint. We have sinned against you by plotting against others. We have sinned against you through superficiality. We have sinned against you by rushing to do evil. We have sinned against you through empty promises. We have sinned against you by betraying a trust. For all these sins, forgiving God, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement.
Ve'al kulam elo aselichot selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu.
Turning to page 387, top of that page with Ritzeh.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'amacha Yisrael utefilatam v'hashev et havdallah lidvir betecha utefilatam b'ahava tekabel b'ratzon utehil ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha v'techazena einenu b'shuvacha leTzion b'rachamim Baruch atah Adonai המחזיר שכינתו לציון.
אמן.
מודים אנחנו לך.
שתהו אדוני אלוהינו. כל בשר יצרנו יצר בראשית ברכות והודות בשם.
הטוב כי לא חלו רחמך והמרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך. מעולם קיווינו לך, ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם, שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. אבינו מלכנו זכור רחמך וכבוש כסך, וכלה דבר וחרב ורעב ושבי ומשחית. ויעבון ושמר ומגפה ופגרה וכל מחלה וכל קטלה וכל קטטה וכל מיני פורעניות וכל גזירה רעה ושנאת חינם מעלינו ומעל כל בני בריתך. וכתוב לחיים טובים כל בני בריתך, וכל החיים יודוך סלה, והללו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלה, ברוך אתה אדוני. הטוב שמך ולך נאה להודות.
אמן.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ברכנו בברכה המשולשת בתורה הכתובה על ידי משה עבדך, האמורה מפי אהרון ובניו כהנים, עם קדושך כאמור. Yivarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha.
Eni ratzon.
Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka.
Eni ratzon.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'asem lecha shalom.
Eni ratzon.
Sim shalom tova uvracha chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael amecha. Barachenu Avinu kulanu ke'echad be'or panecha ki ve'or panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu. Torat chaim v'avat chesed Utzedaka uvracha v'rachamim v'chayim v'shalom v'tov v'einecha levarech et amecha Yisrael b'chol et uv'chol sha'a b'shlomecha b'sefer chayim bracha v'shalom ופרנסה טובה, ניזכר וניכתב לפניך. אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל, לחיים טובים, לחיים טובים, Shalom. Baruch atah Adonai, oseh hashalom.
Turning to page 389 as the ark is opened for Avinu Malkeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu chatanu lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu en lanu mel ela ata. Malkeinu asiyim. Avinu Malkeinu kadvenu b'sefer chayim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu kadvenu b'sefer gula v'shua. Avinu Malkeinu kadvenu b'sefer panasa v'chalkala. Avinu Malkeinu Katvenu besefer zichuyot. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Katvenu besefer silicha umechila. Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu aseh lemancha lema'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu chanenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu chanenu v'anenu ki en banu masim. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu chanenu v'anenu. Avinu Malkeinu chanenu v'anenu ki ein banu masim. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu.
As the ark is closed, you may be seated. Full Kaddish, page 390.
Yikra v'yikra shemei Rabba, v'yamad yivrach kirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayera kol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'yimeru. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach, le'alam ul'al me'amaya, yitbarach. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramah v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kurasha. Le'ela le'ela mikober chata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata damiram v'yalma v'yimeru. Tikabel tzuloton avoton d'chol Yisrael kadam avohon d'vishmaya v'yimeru. Yehi shlom rabba min shemaya v'chayim oleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Oseh shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
Again, the strange liturgy of Yom Kippur. At the conclusion of Mincha, there's no Aleinu, there's no mourner's Kaddish. Get that sense of a long day of prayer. Folks, we are witnessing something that I believe is unprecedented, at least in the 23 years of my history at Bethel Congregation, which is that we are running about 20 minutes early at this point. 20 minutes early. Now, were I a kind professor and we had finished what we needed to do in class, I would just let you go home early. I mean, because I'm a nice guy. But we can't do that tonight because we have to wait until the proper time for the sounding of the Tekiah Gedolah, when Yom Kippur is actually over, and then we can return to our homes. I mean, you can return anytime you like, but we have to wait here in terms of services until the proper time, which is about 7:55 tonight, give or take. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes, first of all, you'll be able to sit and relax a little bit, which is nice. And Rabbi Sorokin and I thought we would spend a few minutes talking about the book of Jonah. Richard read it so beautifully, as he always does. And it is such a wonderful book, one of my favorite biblical texts. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about it. And we'll get to Ne'ilah probably right about 6:35, so in about 15 minutes or so. I first have to say, it really was remarkable as Richard was reading. Jonah seemed to coincide almost exactly when he was reading passages about water, that the rain was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Richard, I don't know if you had a sense of that when you were chanting. Yeah, because you could hear it because right above there, yeah. Sometimes things just work out that way. It was really kind of a striking thing. So Rabbi Sorokin, how are you? How you feeling?
Honestly, my ears are smushed.
From wearing a mask all day, yeah.
Otherwise, I'm good. Rabbi Schwartz, we actually have never had a conversation about Jonah, although I think there's so much in it that we probably could talk for hours, which we won't, but we've got about 15 minutes.
Yeah. So what strikes you about the text?
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, I love the story of Jonah. I feel like there are so many different parts of it that speak to me. I feel like one of the things that's super interesting to me is the process of going down, down, and down, right? So that, we see Jonah, and, he seems to be a good enough guy. He's like doing his thing, and then God calls out to him and tells him to basically go on this mission. And he tries to hide, which is, I sort of have a lot of different feelings, but part of that makes me laugh. Like it makes me feel like, yeah, he jumps on a boat and he tries to go somewhere else. He tries to go to Tarshish, and then, one of the things that I love is that, while he's on the boat, there are all of these, it's like there's a whole bunch of tumult, like there's a storm. And one of my favorite parts of the entire reading is that he goes down into his cabin and he decides to take a nap. And it's really like, I think it's one of the funniest things to me, because like I get that. It's just like such a human moment. Like we all have our things that we do when we get like uncomfortable or stressed. I tend to go to the refrigerator, he tends to go to sleep. So I think it's like a good moment.
It also works with Yom Kippur afternoon when a lot of people take naps. We talked about that today. So there's that kind of crossover there in terms of the action. Yeah.
So tell me, what do you think though? So we have Jonah, who's basically running away from God's mission for him, which is to go to Nineveh and to get the people in Nineveh to repent. And then we have him sort of going, trying to run away, going onto the ship. You have all of these really pious non-Jews on the ship who sort of wake him up in his cabin and are like, hey, what's going on here? He says, it's because of me that, we've hit this sort of stormy seas, throw me overboard. And then he lands, they throw him overboard, which they feel very badly about. They actually like pray to God about it and they offer a sacrifice about it. And then ultimately, he ends up in the belly of a fish. So you take us there. What do you think is interesting about that part?
Well, a number of things in there. One is, I talked about this a little bit this morning in my sermon, but we've been looking at Jonah in that Thursday afternoon Talmud class. We've been looking at it for a few weeks, and someone suggested, and I don't remember who it was. If it might have been Leah, or was it you, Leah? She said, what if what's actually happening there is that Jonah's not fleeing from God, that he's fleeing from himself. In other words, his opinion of himself is so low that he doesn't think he should be called by God. He doesn't think he's deserving of that call, and that's the reason he tries to get away. It's sort of like an internal psychological move that Jonah's making, which I just thought was a really fascinating way to look at that moment in the story and at the story in general.
Well, it's sort of interesting too, if I can jump on that for a sec, that you definitely see Moshe's reluctance, about being called upon to lead too. So it's an interesting thing.
It's a classic prophetic trait.
Yeah.
I guess
humility.
Or they didn't want to work hard. I don't know. It was one or the other. But just so folks know, it tells us where he tries to flee to, which is Tarshish. So just geographically, what you have to imagine is, it would be like if you were in Chicago and someone called you and said, you've got to get to New York as soon as possible, and you went to the airport and boarded a flight to LA. That's what Jonah does. He gets not that he gets as far as possibly can. That's what he does. But the other thing, in terms of it's a very, very interesting book in terms of how the Gentile, the non-Jewish community is portrayed. Because you have two groups of non-Jews, and you have the sailors on the boat with Jonah, and then you have the Ninevites. And both groups are, in a sense, pious, good-hearted people. They want to do right. They feel that God should kind of be an important force in their lives. It's really just fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in some ways, one of the reasons I think that we read this, portion at this time of day is that it really does show us that people can change, right? And communities can change, which I think is really powerful. And the other thing I was just thinking about what was suggested in terms of, maybe sort of a feeling of reluctance on the part of Jonah that he might not be worthy or capable. But I was thinking that what happens next actually might lead us to a different place, because what ends up happening, right, is that he goes, he gets spat back out of the belly of the fish after praying to God. God, it makes that happen. And then we have the whole scene where he's sort of like out there in the desert underneath the tree when the worm comes. And it's an interesting thing because we see that Jonah is actually really upset with God at the way that God changed God's mind about punishing the people of Nineveh, right? And like, I think right there is sort of this weird moment where we see, actually, I think the whole time, the reason that Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh was that he knew that God was a compassionate God, and that if the people could change, that the whole mission would be like turned up on its head, right? That there wasn't going to be true justice. And I think in some ways, like, that's what he's sort of pouting about. You know, he keeps saying, like, just let me die, right? Like, it's very dramatic. But I think part of it is that, you know, he wants, or at least he's saying, he wants a just God. And God is like, hey, I'm a compassionate God.
So that's an interesting thing. I mean, I think you could argue that God actually is just because the system works the way it's supposed to work, right? First of all, Jonah must be the most effective prophet of all time. I mean, he walks into Nineveh, he says, I think, 4 words, and the whole town that's it, we got to repent, and everybody does it.
As opposed to Noah, right, who like has to build a whole boat, and then people don't change their ways, like.
What about Isaiah? He took 67 chapters, and you know, so literally it's 4 words, I think, that Jonah says there, and that's in and of itself something. But then once that happens, the system plays out the way it's supposed to play out, because the premise is, okay, the prophet tells you you have to repent, and then it ball's in your court, you know. So you repent, the people repent, everybody gets on board with it, and then God reacts in the appropriate way, which is to say that, okay, there will be no punishment for the city, repentance has been effective, I accept it. And that's when Jonah gets upset. I've never, you know, I remember even as a boy, reading this text and sitting in shul next to my dad. And I grew up in a Reform congregation, so we read it in English so I could understand what was, you know, and just puzzling over the end of, like, what the heck is going on with this guy? And really, I still struggle with it to this day.
You know, and it's so funny that you say that, because in some ways, right, like, that's what we collectively are in the process of playing out, right? We've been here all day, we've been praying, we've been working for 10 days, like, we're doing our best to do tshuva, right, to transform ourselves. And, you know, in, like, very little time, we're going to blow the shofar and feel like we have been forgiven, right? Like the people of Nineveh, like, God, you know, God is going to judge us for good. But it's like a funny thing that Jonah is like, I feel like he's stewing over this. Like, it's a very
Would you want Jonah as your lawyer? You know what I mean? No, think about how that would work. Jonah would go to the judge, right? It would be like the Midrash. Jonah goes to the judge and pleads for forgiveness for you. You're the client, and the judge says, okay, you're right. Your client's off the hook. And Jonah says, no, I don't want to get off the hook. No, that's not the way it's supposed.
But then you have the whole scene, right, where God is going to teach something to Jonah, which is a really important thing, right? It's a moment where, you know, he's sort of sitting comfortably under the tree, and then the worm comes and devours the tree, and all of a sudden Jonah gets very upset about this. And God has that really sort of teachable moment. I don't know if you want to speak to that, where he's like, what?
What do you think God's teaching him there?
Well, I think there God says to him, right, like, you know, here you are sort of crying over the tree, the destruction of the tree. And, you know, and you couldn't really understand why I would be upset if I needed to destroy a people, a community, you know, people that I have invested in. Like, you didn't even plant the tree. You showed up and I gave it to you, right? Like, I, God, am the creator of those people. And so it's an interesting thing. I almost feel like we need another passage at the end to sort of say, like, and Jonah got it.
Right,
you know?
right. And we don't have that.
No.
Of course, we can only imagine. In fact, one of the things that's odd about the book of Jonah as a whole is that it actually ends in a question. I mean, the last sentence of the book is a question. In an English text, you'd have a question mark at the end, which is odd. You know, I've always felt that, obviously many messages, right, for Yom Kippur and why it's appropriate that it's chosen. By the way, the reason that you have a Havdallah on Yom Kippur afternoon is because, it's not because it's Yom Kippur, it's because it's a fast day. I don't know, anytime there's a fast day, there's a Havdallah read in the afternoon. So today's a fast day, so that's why we have a Havdallah. Now, why that text? I mean, and to me, obviously, the messages of repentance, effectiveness of repentance, what it means to fully give yourself over to God's message and God's mission, all of those questions which are at play as we're in shul on Yom Kippur. But what I love about the text most of all is that, for me, Yom Kippur, I really experience it as such an inward day. We're so self-focused, and that's appropriate for today. That's what it. But meanwhile, in 4 days we're going to be sitting in a sukkah, and Sukkot is our most outward-oriented holiday, right? That's when we're praying for water, not for the Jews, but for the whole world. We're offering sacrifices for the whole world on Sukkot, and so Jonah to me is this transitional moment to lead us out of that inwardness, back out into the world, so we can say, okay, we know that whatever work we're able to accomplish on Yom Kippur, that can't only be positive for us, our families, but it has to be positive for the whole world. Maybe that's a lesson that Jonah missed, but that we're supposed to get.
I love that idea. And I feel like, you made me think about Isaiah that we read this morning. And
Another
in
great
some
text.
ways, right, like we're doing all of this very sort of personal work. We're davening a lot in the plural, sort of recognizing our community. And then Isaiah teaches us right through the words, like it's not only about going through the motions, it's not only about the rituals, it's about taking care of the vulnerable. It's about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, right? It's about making sure that that those who don't have are taken care of. And as Jews, we have a responsibility to do that. And then I think sort of, at this time of the day/night, we sort of like blow that whole thing up even bigger to say, it's not only the vulnerable that you need to take care of, it's the people that you don't even know in the towns that like aren't in your backyards, right? So all of a sudden now, it's like we keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we realize that Kol Yisrael, Aravim Zeh Lazeh, right? That we're all Jews are responsible for each other, but also that we have to do our part even bigger, like in this greater world that God created.
That's a wonderful, wonderful thought and a wonderful way of connecting this morning's Havdallah, the Isaiah text, which is another incredible text, Isaiah 57, with the Jonah text, two unbelievable biblical texts that the sages lay out for us on Yom Kippur. If you can remember what you just said, then your next year Yom Kippur sermon is written. It's already done. So with that in mind, I want to thank folks for their patience. Hope you enjoyed the discussion, give you a few things to think about in terms of the book of Jonah. And we can now turn our attention to the Ne'ilah service. So we'll get started with Ne'ilah in just a moment. Just a couple of things about Ne'ilah. Again, odd structure of the davening, that ashrei that we would have expected to see before the Mincha service will appear here before Ne'ilah. The Uva L'Tzion also will appear here before Ne'ilah, although it should have been, so to speak, before Mincha, that combination, that sort of mixing and melding of the various services. So we see that. Also, you know that the tradition is for the repetition of this Amidah, to open the ark. The ark will remain open through all of Ne'ilah. Once it's opened through the rest, it'll stay open through the rest of Ne'ilah. Now, traditionally, also, you know that here at Bethel, that open ark has been an opportunity for people to come forward to the ark to offer private and personal prayers. Unfortunately, we are not going to do that today because of COVID and various and sundry social distancing concerns. So we hope very much to be able to do that next year because people feel that's a very meaningful practice, very meaningful opportunity. You can follow the beginning of the Ne'ilah service with the Ashrei, which you'll find on page 394, 394.
Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yahalelu Chasela. Tehillat Adonai daber pi, יברך את כל בשר, כן שורשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברכיה מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה.
On page 396. Kadosh Yosef Tilo Israel.
ויבטחו וקיודי שמך, כלו עזבת לא רשך, אדוני. אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ואדיר.
Middle of page 397 with the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה. לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא ויאמרו.
We'll rise together for the silent recitation of the Mincha Amidah. Text begins on page 398. 398, quiet prayer. Encourage those who are still davening, take your time, finish your prayers, these last moments really of Yom Kippur for this year. If you have completed your davening, you may certainly be seated at this point and turning to page 407 for a piyut, a liturgical poem, El Nora Alila, page 407. It's a Sephardic piyut. Beautiful sense that we are calling out to God in these last moments. The sun is going down, and our strength is renewed at the end of Yom Kippur. Page 407.
El Nora Alila.
Come to the repetition of the Mincha Amidah. This is the moment when the ark is open. Traditionally, will remain open throughout the entire repetition. It's the only time in the year when that is done. The ark is open for that long during a service. Of course, traditional to rise. Once again, encouraging those who would like to sit down, please do not hesitate to sit down. Also want to acknowledge that traditionally, going back generations here at Bethel, this is a moment when the Reef family would come forward. So Billy Reef would open the ark and stand there during the Ne'ilah service with tremendous pride. And then his daughter Cheryl did it. His granddaughter Erica did it. And Erica, now a mother, Dahlia. So we hope Dahlia next year will be able to be here and help Erica and Cheryl open the ark for Ne'ilah. Page 408 is the beginning of the repetition.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon. גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. בסוד חכמים ונבונים ומלמד דת מבינים אבטחה פי בתפילה ובתקנונים לקלות ולכהנן פני מלך מלא רחמים מוחל וסולח לעוונים. זוכרנו לחיים מלך מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מקיים מתים אתה רב להושיע מקלקל חיים וחסד, מקיים מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים. מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישוע מי כמוך אב הרחמים זוכר יצוריו ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון. שמע נא אסלח נא היום ונהל כפנה היום ונהלל כנרה ויום קדוש
the Kedusha is on page 411.
ובהם תרץ ותוקדש, כסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך. וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, ליומתם ברוך יאמרו. ממקומו הוא יפן ברקמים ויקונם המייחדים שמו. ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה. שמע, שמע, שמע אומרים. שמע. הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית לעיני כל קי, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אלוהינו, מה אדיר שמך בכל הארץ, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה.
On page 413.
ותמלוך אתה אדוני לבדך על כל מעשיך, בהר ציון משכן כבודך, ובירושלים עיר קודשך, ככתוב בדברי קודשך. ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. קדוש אתה ונורא שמך, ואין אלוה מבלעדיך. ככתוב, ויגבה אדוני צבאות במשפט, והאל הקדוש נקדש בצדקה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלך הקדוש. אתה בחרתנו מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו, ורוממתנו מכל הלשנות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך. בשמך גדול, גדול הקדוש, עלינו עלתה.
Turning to page 414, the imagery of Ne'ilah is the closing of the gate, and here, Petach lanu sha'ar, open for us, God, the gates.
Petach lanu sha'ar, ve'et Ne'ilah sha'ar, Kifana ayom yifne, השמש יבוא ויפנה, נבוא שעריך. אנה אל נא סנה סלקנה. תעבור על פשע ותמחה אשם, כיום ויתייצב עמושם. תאזין שבתנו ותגשימנו מאמר, כיום ויקרא בשם אדוני. Adonai, Adonai, El Rakum Bechanun, Erech Apayim, Verav Chesed Ve'emet, Notzer Chesed L'alafim, נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקה סלח לנו אבינו כי חטאנו, מחל לנו מלכנו כי פשענו, כי אתה אדוני טוב וסלח ורב חסד וכל חלקך. סלח נא לעוון העם כגודל חסדך, וכאשר נסעת לעם הזה ממצרים ועד הנה, ושם נאמר
on page 416.
אין כת מסעדך, טל לפני כיסא כבודך, מלא משאלות עם יקדך, שומע תפילת בידיך. ישראל נשא באדוני, תשועת עולמים. גם היום יבשו מפיך יושן ודמים, כי אתה רב סליחות ובעל הרחמים. יקבינו ישמיענו סלחתי.
Turning to page 418, English side, bottom of the page, we'll read that paragraph together. 418, last paragraph. At this hour of the closing of the gates and the setting of the sun, may the stronghold of Israel, with kindness, announce to the chosen people, raise up high, O you gates, so that my people may enter. Pour the waters of atonement on the people whom you have chosen to adore you. Redeem the children of the upright. Respond to the people who love you. This is the path on which you shall walk. See, I stand before you. Go forth joyfully with a full heart. Partake of your meal. Drink your wine. Page 419.
No, 418. 418. לך בשמחה, הכל לכל לחמך, ושתה בלב יום ינך. לך בשמחה, הכל לכל לחמך, ושתה בלב טוב ינך. אלוהים הדר במלאכה, שמע אין כת אמונך. ובשר את עמך, צלחתי את זדונך.
And 419.
לכם נא כהלדת ישורון, סלח ומחל עוונם. והושיענו אלוהי אישנו. שערי שמיים פתח, ויוצרך הטוב לנו תפתח. תושיע וריב אל תמתק והשינו אלוהי ישענו. אל מלך יושב על כיסא רחמים, מתנהג בחסידות, מוחל הבנות עמו, מביא ראשון, מרבה מחילה לחטאים, וסליחה לפושעים, עושה צדקות עם כל בשר ורוח, לא חרתם תגמול, אל הורת לנו לומר 13. וירד אדוני בענן, ויתייצב עמו שם, ויקרא בשם אדוני. אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, ערך כפיים ורב חסד ואמת, נוצר חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקה וסר. סלח לנו אבינו כי חטאנו, מחל לנו מלכנו.
On page 420, Ki Anu Amecha.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו, כי אנו עמך ואתה אלוהינו, אנו בניך ואתה אבינו, אנו עבדיך ואתה אדוננו, אנו קהלך ואתה חלקנו, אנו נחלתך ואתה גורלנו, אנו צונך ואתה רואינו, אנו כרמך ואתה נותרנו, אנו פעולתך ואתה יוצאנו, אנו רעייתך ואתה דודנו, אנו סגולתך ואתה יודענו, אנו עמך ואתה מלכנו, אנו מאמירך ואתה מאמירנו. אנו הזפנים ואתה רחום וחנון, אנו קשה עורף ואתה ערך אפיים, אנו מלא עוון ואתה מלא רחמים, אנו ימינו כצל עובר ואתה הוא שנותיך לא יתאמו. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, תבוא לפניך תפילתנו, ואל תתעלם מתחינתנו, שאין אנחנו הזפנים וקשה עורף, לומר לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אנחנו חטאנו.
Page 421, last recitation of sins on this Yom Kippur, the Ashamnu.
Ay, 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 Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, דיברנו דופי, איי 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 הבינו והרשענו זדנו, חמסנו, תפלנו שקר. Ay, 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 יעצנו רע, כי עזבנו, לעצנו, מרדנו, ניאצנו, שררנו, אבינו, פשענו, שררנו, כישינו עורף. Ay, 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 רשענו, שיקטנו, תייבנו, טעינו, איתנו, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, מחל עוונותינו ביום הכיפורים הזה, מחבר העבר פשעינו וחטאותינו מנגד עיניך, כאמור. אנוכי המחה בשעיך, למעני וחטאותיך לא אזכור ונאמר. מחיתי רעב פשעיך, וכענן חטאותיך. שובה אלי כי גאלתיך ונאמר. כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם, לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם. לפני אדוני תטהרו. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך. סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בשועתך, וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת. כי אתה סלחן לישראל, ומקלן לשבטי ישורון בכל דור ודור. ומבלעדיך אין לנו מלך מוחל וסולח אלא אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני. מלך מוחל וסולח לעוונותינו ולעוונות עמו בית ישראל, ומעביר אשמותינו בכל שנה ושנה. מלך על כל הארץ, נקדש ישראל ליום הכיפורים. רצה אדוני אלוהינו בעמך ישראל ובתפילתם, והשבת העבודה לדביר ביתך, באהבה תקבל ברצון, ותהי רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך. ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים. ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון.
Page 423, English side. We'll read together. Last paragraph, left column. We thank you. We thank you, you who are our God and the God of our ancestors through all time, protector of our lives, shield of our salvation. From one generation to the next, we thank you and sing your praises for our lives that are in your hands, for our souls that are under your care, for your miracles that accompany us each day, for your wonders and your gifts that are with us each moment, evening, morning, and noon. You are the one who is good, whose mercy is never ending, the one who is compassionate, whose love is unceasing. We have always placed our hope in you. For all these blessings, may your name be praised and exalted, our sovereign, always and forever. Hatov kilo chalarachamecha.
הטוב כי לא כלו רחמך, והמרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך, מעולם קיווינו לך. ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. אבינו מלכנו, זכור רחמך וכבוש כעסך, וכלה דבר בחרב ורעב, ושבי ומשחית. ועוון ושמד מגף ופגע, וכל מחלה, וכל תקלה, וכל קטקה, וכל מיני פורעניות, וכל גזרה רעה, ושנאת חינם מעלינו, ומעל כל בני בריתך. יחתום לחיים טובים כל בני בריתך, וכל הקיים יודו כסלע, והללו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני. הטוב שמך ולכאן האל להודות. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ברכנו בברכה המשולשת בתורה, הכתובה על ידי משה עבדך, האמורה מפי אהרון ובניו, כהנים. עם קדושך כאמור, יברכך אדוני וישמרך. יאל אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך. יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך. שלום. שים שלום בעולם טוב וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברכנו אבינו כולנו כאחד באור פניך, כי באור פניך נתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו תורת חיים ואהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה, נזכר ונחתם לפניך. אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים, לחיים ולשלום.
Avinu Malkeinu, page 425.
Avinu Malkeinu, חטאנו לפניך. אבינו מלכנו, אין לנו מלך אלא אתה. אבינו מלכנו, החזירנו בתשובה שלמה לפניך.
Avinu Malkeinu, Hanenu Vahanenu, Avinu Malkeinu, Hanenu Vahanenu, Ien Banu Masim, Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah v'chesed, Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed, v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu, Chanenu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'Hanenu, Ien Banu Masim.
As the ark is closed, you may be seated on page 428, the full Kaddish.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shem Elohah, Almadi v'dakiru tevim nikmal kutevechei, kolum v'vei kolum kair kol beit Yisrael, b'agalav izman kadi v'imeru, Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevalach, ve'olam olam me'almaya. Yitvarak v'yishtabak v'yitvav v'yitamav v'yitnaseh v'yitadav v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha v'dik uleel aleel amikol v'katav v'shilata tushvekata v'nekamata dam yiran be'alma v'imeru. Amen. Titkabal tzalot hon lovat hon lekol Yisrael kadam v'hon v'shamaya v'imeru. Amen. Yehi shlamar rabba b'shamay v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav, uyaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen.
There's just one service left. Ma'arif services.
In just a moment, we'll continue with Ma'ariv service, which can be found on page 429. Stay where you are for just a moment, and I'll tell you in a minute or so we can rise. Page 445.
ואורח הוא יכפר ובון ולא ישחית, וירבה להשיב אפו, ולא יאיר כל חמתו. אדוני הושיע מלך יעננו, ויום קוראנו. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
We are seated and we continue on page 445 in the middle of the page.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב הרבי.
Amen. Page 446.
כי הם חיינו באורך ימינו, והם נחיה יומם בלילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך uvelechtecha v'aderech, uveshochbecha uvekumecha, ukshartam leot ayadecha, v'hayu litotafot beinenecha, uchtavtam al mizuzot beitecha, uvisha arecha. We're seated and we continue quietly on page 447. We join together in the middle of the left-hand side, page 447. Therefore, impress these words of mine upon your heart and upon your soul. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and let them be a symbol above your eyes. Teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your home, when you walk on your way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Inscribe them upon the doorposts of your home and on your gates. Then the length of your days and the days of your children on the land that Adonai swore to give to your ancestors will be as numerous as the days of the heavens over the earth. Continuing on the right-hand side in the middle of the page.
Adonai Elohechem Emet.
Continuing on page 448.
Umalchuto biratzon kibelu alehem Moshe uMiriam uvenei Israel lechanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yameru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot osefer malchutecha ra'u v'necha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe zeili anu v'ameru Adonai meloch leolam vaed v'ne'amar kivar Adonai et Yaakov ugalom yad chazak mimenu baruch atah Adonai ga'al Yisrael.
Amen. Page 449.
ושמור צאתנו בואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל אמן יתקרא ויתקרא שמי רבה וילמד יברך רותי והמליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומייכון ובחייכו בית ישראל בגלוי בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לעילם ינגול ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן מעלמה ויאמרו
Amen. We turn to the Amidah, which is recited quietly in the evenings, beginning on page 450 and going through page 455.
Oseh shalom bimroma. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imeru amen.
Middle of page 455.
יתקרא וירקרא שמי רבה.
אמן.
וילמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכונו וימיכונו ובחייכו בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קרוב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולם ועמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה ברכו. לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. תתקבל צלותינו ובטון דכל ישראל קודם ובון וישמעיה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו על כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו
Amen. Page 456, we rise for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, עמד מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשיבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ומעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. על כן יקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
We pause at this time in our service to remember with reverence those of our beloved departed whose yahrzeits are observed today, the 11th day of Tishrei. Rebecca Leah Bloom, Albert Kaplan, Irving Yanofsky, Hilda Glushko, Jacob Greenfeld, Stanley J. Katz, Jay Lassens, Jenny Marks, David Mazer, Mildred Miller, Dr. Saul Moses, Isidore Alvin Passeru, Bessie Rutkovitz, Mayor Rutkovitz, Charles Schmidt, Bella Schwartz, Deborah Sinai, Jesse Spector, Henrietta Stroh, Esther Willer, Morris Hill Wolf, and Ari Zimmelman. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may all of their memories always be a blessing. And will those people who are in a period of mourning or observing a yahrzeit please join me in the recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish, which can be found on page 457. Yitkadal v'yitkadash meraba.
Amen.
V'yalma divrach hirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'yimeru. Amen. Yehi shmei rab amevarach le'olam olmeo maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemeda kudesha brechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Da'amiran b'yalma v'yimeru. Amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. In just a moment, we will turn to page 459. The lights will dim and we will rise, as is our tradition to do, at the end of our service, as we mark the transition to the mundane week, but the joyful week that lies ahead. Please join me, page 459. We rise for Havdallah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei ha'ein. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil bein kodesh lechol, bein ol lechoshech, bein Yisrael la'amim, bein yom hashvi'i lesheshet yamei ha'maaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil bein kodesh lechol.
Amen.
And on page 429, Siyum HaTfilah, the concluding page of prayer for this Yom Kippur. Page 429 will remain standing.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael.
Baruch Shem Kevod Malkuto Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malkuto Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malkuto לעולם ועד. אדוני הוא האלוהים. 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 אדוני הוא האלוהים.
Go forth in confidence from this house of God, and may the blessings of our God go with you. Take with you the words of prayer that you have uttered, and may God give you strength to fulfill your resolves. May God's Spirit be with you and those you love. May you be granted health and contentment. May God give strength, hope, and vision to our people. May all soon be blessed in a world at peace. T'kiya Gedolah.
לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, בשנה הבאה, בשנה הבאה בירושלים.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Beautiful job, everybody. Stay here.